You're getting married tomorrow. Not because you fell in love or even agreed to it, but because at the age of 12 your parents made a business decision. You weren't a child to be raised. You were a contract to be signed. Your wedding isn't about joy. It's about alliances, inheritance, and strategy. And your wedding night, that's not private either. Guests may literally escort you to bed, and in some circles, wait outside for proof the marriage was consummated. If you survive that, and the likely pregnancy that follows, congratulations. You've now got a coin toss's chance that your new spouse won't mistreat you under the full protection of the law. Think your dating life is complicated? Try medieval marriage, where till death do us part wasn't a vow, it was the expected timeline. If you want to learn the kind of history your teachers skipped, hit that subscribe button and comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Let's start with Margaret Beaufort, a young noble girl born into privilege and into danger. At age 6, her guardians married her to another child to control her inheritance. She never recognized that marriage. A few years later, she was remarried, this time to Edmund Tudor. She was 12. He was 24. Within months, she was expecting a child. Though disturbing by today's standards, these practices weren't considered unusual in upper-class medieval society. Children, especially girls, were valuable assets, and marriage was a transaction. Love wasn't a factor. Stability was. Nobility needed secure alliances. Wealth had to stay within family lines. And when war or disease constantly threatened those fortunes, parents acted fast. Marriage was less about companionship and more about control. Sadly, Margaret's story was far from unique. Isabella of Valois was married off at age 6 to King Richard II of England. Her wedding trousseau included dolls. The contract specified the marriage wouldn't be consummated until she turned 12. That was the world they lived in, one where childhood ended not with age, but with politics. Now let's talk about the wedding night, the part that makes modern reality TV look tasteful. In many noble circles after the wedding feast, guests would parade the newlyweds to the bedchamber. The bride's attendants would help her prepare for bed, offer advice, and even arrange the room. The groom's companions would do the same. Then, in some regions, everyone stuck around long enough to ensure the couple entered the bed together. In especially high-stakes marriages, like royal unions, witnesses sometimes waited for confirmation that the marriage had been made official. Not visually, but symbolically. This could involve a priest blessing the bed or attendants waiting outside the curtains. It sounds shocking today, but it was simply part of verifying legal union. This wasn't just tradition. In medieval law, a marriage wasn't considered fully valid until it was consummated. No consummation meant no inheritance, no political alliance, and no legal union. Margaret of York's wedding to Charles the Bold in 1469 included such a ritual. Dozens of noble guests attended, chronicling every detail. The pressure was immense. A single delay or refusal could unravel years of political negotiation. But let's be clear, these practices weren't universal. They were more common among the elite. Peasant weddings were far more private, and over time, even kings grew tired of the spectacle. Charles I of England eventually locked his door and refused the tradition altogether. Still, for child brides like Isabella of Valois, this ceremony marked a moment where the line between childhood and adulthood vanished, whether or not anything else happened afterward. In medieval times, pregnancy wasn't considered a blessing. It was often a life-threatening ordeal, especially for young girls. Margaret Beaufort, pregnant at 12, endured a brutal labor at 13. Her husband had died of plague while she was still carrying his child, forcing her to travel through a harsh winter to deliver alone. Her confessor described the birth as nearly miraculous because no one expected a girl so young to survive. She never bore another child. The damage was permanent, and her case wasn't isolated. Roughly 1 in 3 women in the medieval period died from childbirth or related complications. With limited medical knowledge, even the best care couldn't guarantee survival. Some birthing practices made things worse, like bloodletting or primitive birthing chairs that increased trauma instead of easing it. Even wealth couldn't protect women. Isabella of Aragon, a noblewoman with access to the finest care available, died in childbirth at 18 after days of suffering. Women were expected to start producing heirs immediately and continuously. 10, even 15 pregnancies over a lifetime wasn't uncommon. The pressure wasn't just cultural, it was contractual. A noblewoman's duty was to secure the family line. Failure to conceive could damage a family's reputation or cause the marriage to be annulled. But if you did conceive, survival wasn't promised. In essence, each pregnancy was a gamble. And many girls were asked to start playing the odds before their bodies were even fully developed. If you survived childhood marriage and childbirth, your next challenge was the marriage itself and the laws that came with it. Under medieval law, husbands had near total authority over their wives. The concept of reasonable chastisement gave men legal permission to discipline their spouses. What counted as reasonable was loosely interpreted. Some laws even allowed a man to strike his wife as long as the stick wasn't thicker than his thumb. This power imbalance went beyond discipline. A married woman had no legal identity apart from her husband. She couldn't own property, sign contracts, or appear in court without his consent. Her words, her body, even her freedom, were legally his. The most extreme example? Henry V. When his wives failed to produce male heirs, or simply fell out of favor, he used medieval marriage law to eliminate them. Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard were both executed after highly questionable charges. The law didn't just allow it, it helped make it happen. And for most women, escape wasn't an option. Divorce was virtually impossible. The Catholic Church only granted annulments in rare cases, typically requiring public proof the marriage was never consummated. Even if a woman had good cause, the legal system favored husbands in every way. Abuse, imprisonment, even permanent confinement were all legal tools a husband could use. For many women, marriage didn't offer protection. It stripped away the few rights they had left. At its core, marriage in the medieval world wasn't about love. It was a business contract, and daughters were part of the exchange. Families negotiated dowries the way modern companies negotiate mergers. A dowry, money, land, titles, or valuable goods, was paid by the bride's family to the grooms. Some dowries were the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars today. For noble families, the stakes were high. One good marriage could raise a family's fortunes. A bad one could ruin them for generations. Take Isabella d'Este. Her dowry took years to finalize. It included land, wealth, and political promises. Once married, everything she owned, including her dowry, legally belonged to her husband. For poor families, a small dowry might mean the difference between marrying a daughter or watching her face a life of poverty. For the bride herself, the deal came with no guarantees. Once married, she had no legal claim to her dowry or protection from mistreatment. Worse, if a husband died, widows often lost everything. Property passed to male relatives. Many women remarried quickly, not for love, but to avoid poverty. Some entered convents because it was the only option that offered food and shelter. A few women, like Margaret Beaufort, learned to navigate the system, becoming powerful through strategic marriages and careful management. But they were rare. Most women were pawns in a much larger game, valuable but expendable. In the medieval world, till death do us part wasn't romantic. It was reality. Most marriages ended not in separation, but in death. Average marriage length? About 15 to 20 years. And often, it was the wife who died first, usually from complications of childbirth. Plagues, wars, and poor hygiene meant short lifespans. The Black Death alone wiped out a third of Europe. Families who spent years arranging marriages could lose sons-in-law before the wedding feast was over, so people adapted. Remarriage was fast and frequent. Widows and widowers often married within months of losing a spouse. Not from coldness, but necessity. Being alone was economically dangerous. Some women married multiple times, gaining wealth and influence with each union. Others weren't so lucky, losing everything with each husband's death. Children from different marriages formed complex family trees, with step-siblings, half-siblings, and ever-shifting alliances. Records from the time read like soap operas. Marriages came and went. Partners died. New unions formed. It was a cycle of hope, grief, and survival. And yet, despite all the trauma, people kept marrying. Because in a world so unpredictable, having a partner, even in a system this flawed, was often the only way to survive. So the next time you think dating is hard, remember, at least you get to choose. At least no one's watching your wedding night. At least childbirth isn't a coin toss. And most importantly, you're not a transaction, you're a person. And in medieval times, that made all the difference.